And the goal in a marriage is to come to the marriage happy, not begging the other person to fill your cup to make you happy, to fill the empty spots. And so in the very beginning with my wife, for example, I was a good listener. I made her feel safe. I was capable of soothing her anxiety. My wife suffers from some significant anxiety. And when I did those things to her, when I made her feel safe and good, she looked at me with these big, beautiful brown eyes, telling me that I was wonderful. And that was healing my wound as a child, that I needed to know that I was wonderful, because I didn't know that as a child. I thought I was just the opposite. So in the beginning phases, my ability to make her feel safe made her feel the most incredible love that she could feel. And that love that she felt made me feel healed, because my mother could never see me. And so
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. You are listening to Don't Be Afraid to Talk podcast with James. I believe if we are going to affect change, we must go back to the basic, which for me, in essence, is conversations. Talking and listening is key for growth, and I hope our stories will bring us together and we can draw inspiration from each other. Conversation will include topics such as mental and physical health, trauma and its effect, suicidal thoughts, recovery, and well-being. We will continue to raise awareness and offer a different perspective, a mindset, or an idea that could inspire you to take charge of your well-being and to grow as a human being. Thank you for joining us today, and welcome to another episode of Ask the Therapist. Today my guest is Dr. Brad Reedy, who is joining me from Salt Lake, Utah.
That's right.
Is that in California?
That is just east of California, about 8 hours by car.
Jeez, that sounds long. Yeah. So thank you very much. Thank you. And today we're going to be talking about his book that I have here, The Audacity to Be You. And we're also going to be touching on subjects like parenting, marriage, and a lot more. So thank you for joining us today. Dr. Reedy, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, I have a Ph.D. in marriage and family therapy, and I got into this because as a child, I struggled with my parents. I struggled with substance use. I struggled with depression. I didn't know it was depression at the time. I thought I was just angry, but I realize now that a lot of the things that were going on in my life with my parents, with my family, were far less than ideal. And so I got into it through that work. And so now I spend my time, I run a wilderness program for adolescents and young adults and families, and I spend the majority of my energy talking with and working with the parents. So while they're sending their children to my program, Evoke Therapy programs, to get treatment, now we're working with families. And so my passion, my bliss, my love is working with parents in a compassionate way, understanding that their journey is still their journey and they get to live it and they get to be honored in it. And there's so much parent education that's about, I think, criticizing parents. So I spend a lot of time doing parent therapy, parent education, parent coaching. We run intensives also for parents. So I spend a lot of time in the parent field and also in the couples field. I do a lot of couples intensives also. So I'm a father of 4, and I get paid to do what I love to do, which is try to pass on the gifts that other therapists have given to me.
That's great. That's great. Thank you very much. Thank you. Can you see me okay, yeah?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, brilliant. Yeah, sorry. Before we get going, we're just going to play a quick game, 1 for 1.
Okay.
I'll give you a random word, and you say the first one that comes to your mind.
Oh, my God. This is, all right, now I'm nervous. Go ahead.
It's just 5 words, sorry. So the first word is detachment.
Healthy.
Ordinary.
Say that again.
Ordinary.
Nobody.
Victory.
Happy.
Talent.
Gifts.
And the last one, hypnotize.
Connected.
Brilliant. Thank you.
I hope I'll get a write-up on what that means about me later on.
They're just random words. They don't mean anything.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, just random words. Yeah, okay, I'm fine now. So I'm just going to pick on some quotes from your book.
Uh-huh.
And if you can just elaborate more on that, please, that would be great.
Love to, yeah.
So the first one, which is chapter 2, is Finding You. And that came across as more of about finding yourself. And you talk about the self. When you talk about the self, like, what do you mean by that?
You know, I know there's a lot of definitions to the self when people talk about. What I mean when I talk about the self is just who you are, your most authentic self, the honest and most true part of yourself. It's your feelings, your thoughts, your wants, your dislikes, your loves, your passions, your hates, your anything that really could start off with the word I feel, I think, I believe. And because so much of that, in my experience as a therapist and a client, so much of that self has been compromised over the year to fit in, to belong, to be deemed acceptable, that the idea of finding it again, of discovering what was lost, discovering what was sacrificed, is that idea of finding you. So it's just finding your most authentic, honest, real self. Yeah.
That's without the needing to feel belong, the needing to trying to fit in, just to find yourself and be happy with yourself.
Right. I think that's so. I don't want to make too large of a statement, but if I were forced to, I would say, that the primary wound that people are carrying around is that in childhood that they had to show up a certain way and hide certain things to be found acceptable by their parents, right? To be found to be somebody the parents could tolerate. So much of my work is helping people unlearn what they learned, but also rediscover the things that were given up a long time ago, mostly in childhood, so that the parents could tolerate the child. So that's a pretty heavy topic to start off with, but that's the idea that I think about when I think about finding you.
Yeah. If you're tuning in, you're like, oh my God, it's only 3 minutes in, and they're questioning my parenting.
That's right.
Sorry, I just have a quote from your book here, which is being right and being. Sorry, let me start again. Being right and being self are two diametrical opposite projects. Is that around focusing on being yourself than being what we say it's right and wrong?
Yeah. Again, this is maybe the thesis of the book, that there's really two projects. You can either try to be right or good, which I think most of us try to do, and actually we're taught that was the worthy project, was to be a good citizen, a good person, a good father, mother, brother, sister, friend, employee. The problem with being good and being right is that it ignores so much of who we are. The great Guru Ram Dass said that the solution to I am good is not I am bad, but the solution to I am bad is not I am good, but the solution really is to own all of yourself, to meet I am bad with I am. I am sometimes crappy, I am sometimes wonderful, and I'm sometimes everything in between. So we have to let go of being good. Again, I know this is a sweeping statement, but we have to learn to sacrifice being good and being right to find out who we really are. And I think that that's such a terrifying and scary process to go through. And that's why in my work, you got to do it with somebody else that can kind of help you carry the burden of that guilt, that shame, that fear that comes up when you're trying to discover who you really are instead of who you should be or shouldn't be.
So in trying to find who you are, in trying to find who you are, you will have to embrace all the things that are bad about yourself. Right.
I wrote just this morning, just minutes before we started. It was actually something I'd written a while ago and just shared it on my social media. I said the outcome of good therapy is realizing that you are a disaster and a miracle all at the same time. You know, when I have an experience as a client in therapy, I'm able to see the dumb things that I do, the ridiculous things that I do, the irrational things that I do with compassion and love. So they're not the enemy anymore. And making mistakes is not the enemy. I'm not fighting my entire life, but rather I'm listening and leaning into all the parts of myself. Because even those, you know, James, those parts of us that we were taught are unacceptable, they have some wisdom and some energy in there that can give us life and creativity. So yes, it's about learning to lean into and embrace the parts of yourself that you have been taught that you should reject or despise or let go of. And what I think is sometimes when you throw that stuff away, you're throwing away powerful parts of yourself, creative parts of yourself that have, I mean, that's what depression is. You get rid of some bad aspects, but you also get rid of a lot of really good energy too when you get rid of that stuff.
And with depression, do you think not being able to accept who you are contributes to that?
I mean, there's a lot to it, right? There's biology and there's chemistry to it, and I want to acknowledge that. And even there are circumstances like this year for me. I suffered from depression in the last year and a half with the pandemic, and I know I'm not alone in that. From the looks of my caseload, I know I'm not alone in that.
No, definitely not.
But I do think that there is a therapeutic idea that you just stated that I would highlight, which is I used to think that depression was about feeling sad, when really it's about not feeling everything. In fact, sometimes the cure, if you will, the therapeutic cure at least, is to learn to feel your sadness, to learn to feel your grief, to learn to feel your anger. And I was just listening to somebody talk yesterday, and he was saying that happiness is better than anger, and I thought that's not exactly true. Anger is just different. It just happiness is better than say.
Okay, you can learn from anger as well, can't you?
Oh my gosh,
we can.
Anger is a really effective tool to get you to be clear about yourself. And oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes I feel angry when I'm not setting good boundaries and other people are letting me down. So anger is an energy in me that says, I wish people would rescue me. I wish people would read my mind and do what I needed. But I'm going to have to assert myself. I'm going to have to take the risk of showing up. Excuse me. Sorry about that. I'm going to have to take the risk of showing up, of telling the truth, and of taking care of myself. Because if I don't, nobody else is going to do it for me. So I think that's a lesson and a gift that anger has to offer us.
Yeah. So. Yes, I got you. Yeah. Sorry. My next quote is from the book, which is, "The role of a parent is to raise healthy selves, not good children."
Yeah. This came out of there was a story about the time that I was writing this part of it, where there was a young man in Southern California where I grew up originally, and he was, the captain of the sports team. He was popular. He was good looking. He had everything going, and he took his own life. And as I read about him and learned about him and read the notes that he left for his mother and his father and his teachers, he left a few notes, and those were published. I could hear in his story that the pressure of being good, the pressure of being the talented one, the beautiful one, the smart one, the shiny and bright one, that it got to him, that he wasn't allowed to be, at times like we all are, a flop, a failure, a screw-up, an imperfect person. And so while we think as parents that our job is to raise good and successful children, the epigraph of my book says that each of us were taught the notions of being correct, and that very notion ensured our failure in the world. And so my thinking is that we raise children to be who they are, and that in becoming who they are, all of their gifts get realized, all of their talents are expressed. But if we try to shape them up or kind of mold them into what we think is the good and the right thing, we lose so much of what makes up who they are. So the idea as parents is it's harder, it's messier, it's more difficult. But the idea is that you're trying to raise a person to be who they are, not a person to be good or to fit somebody else's, including yours, idea about what it means to be a good person or a good citizen.
Yeah. Because often, like as a parent, your focus is to raise a good child.
Yeah.
And often that means them ticking boxes
Right.
that society expect them to tick.
There was a movie a few years ago called Inside Out. It's a cartoon. It's supposed to be a child's movie, but like a lot of children's movies, they're for adults too.
They actually are, yeah.
There's a scene where this young girl had been moved from Minnesota, where she was on the ice hockey team. She had a bunch of friends, and she moved to San Francisco, California. And in this scene at the dinner table, mother and father are sitting there, and she's very sad about all the losses that she's just experienced and how unhappy she is in San Francisco. Even the pizza with the pineapple on it is very different than the pizza back in Minnesota. And as she's sitting there sad and blue, the father yells at her and said, "Where did my good little girl go?" In other words, he's equating her being happy with being good. And he misses then to lean into and to support her sadness, because as you know, being sad is means that you love. Being sad means that you care. Grieving a loss means that you had an attachment. And for this father and this mother, because it's so difficult to sit with a child's grief and sadness, they wanted her to be good. They wanted her to be happy. And even in that little cartoon, we get a glimpse of how damaging it can be to raise children to be what we think is good, instead of raising them to be who they are and to feel all that they feel.
Yes, conscious children.
Yes, that's a great way to say it. Yeah,
conscious children. It's not easy, because I think so often with parents, you try to raise the child the same way you were raised.
Right.
But especially now, this generation, like the way the world's going, I don't think the two of them match.
No, I think there's a lot of times when you're taking simply your background, especially your unexplored background, and you're trying to apply it to raising the child, you end up missing the child. I have 4 children, and the same approaches don't work with all 4 of them. So if I just come in with a template, with an idea about how they need to be raised, what happens is I miss them. I miss seeing them and their uniqueness, and that takes a lot more work than just applying an idea or applying a template to somebody.
Yeah. Great. There was another quote here which I thought was good. I would rather be whole than be good.
Mm-hmm. That's actually from Carl Jung, and I think it speaks to the same idea that to be all of you is the greatest expression of life. I mean, the meaning of life is your life.
To express it, yeah.
You are the answer to what is the meaning of life, your life, and because it doesn't matter if it's religion. Honestly, it doesn't matter if it's religion, if it's culture, if it's even psychology. If we start getting into the idea about creating good people, we miss all of them. We want to help them make sense out of all the parts of themselves, and with that exploration, with that embracing of all the parts of them, we get a much more beautiful picture of a person than we do if they're just trying to show us the shiny and pretty parts, which are impressive, but don't have the depth and the texture of all that we have to offer as humans.
Yeah, great. And I have another question here in relation to the subtitle. The problem is outside of me.
Yeah.
So this is around so the scenario here where a child is in pain and crying, and the parent is feeling uncomfortable about it.
Right.
And I think you have on here, I might find it easier to label the child as inadequate. He's too sensitive, he's too dramatic, he's too needy. And then you have, rather than owning the feeling of inadequate and dealing with it, I project it onto, rather than owning my feeling of inadequate and dealing with it, I project it not onto,
No worries.
Yeah, so I'll start again, take 3. So rather than owning my feeling and inadequate of dealing with it, I project it not onto, but into the other person. So is this where So you have a child who's in pain or angry, whatever, and the parent is projecting their own insecurity. Is that the right word?
Yeah, that's a good word. You know, it's actually very simple and universally common. My mother, I'll use my example. That's probably the easiest one to use.
Yeah.
My mother was a single mother raising 3 boys. And of the 3 boys, I was the middle child, and I was the one who was making the most noise, who was getting into trouble, who was the most vocal about what he was feeling when I was angry, sad, frustrated, so forth. And so instead of my mother owning the fact that she could, that I had exceeded her capacity, instead of saying, you know, I need help, or let's get you a therapist, or let's get you a mentor, because there was no father in my life, and it was just her on her own trying to make ends meet. She told me I was bad. You know, she told it to me by saying, you're too sensitive. You're being melodramatic. You're being dramatic in the situation. So instead of saying, as a mother, I am inadequate and I'm sorry and I will get help, she said, you're wrong and you're bad and you need to fit within my abilities. You need to fit who you are within my bandwidth and within my capacity. So she took her inadequacy and she put it into me. So then I went through childhood believing something was wrong with me.
Okay.
And it wasn't wrong with me. What I was saying, what I was feeling was real. And now I use all of that as part of my gift and my practice and my work and my own parenting, my own relationships. But for many years, I thought because I had exceeded her limits of what she could deal with, I was led to believe that something was wrong with me when in fact something was wrong with her. And I'll give my mother credit, because she's done a lot of therapy since then.
Yeah.
And she's 80 years old. She just turned 80 this month. But about 5 years ago, she said to me in the car one day, she apologized. She said, I'm sorry. You were too big for me, and I didn't know what to do, and I was overwhelmed with you, and I'm sorry that I hurt you. And even though I'd done my own therapy work around this issue and had made sense of it, I thought it was a great gift for her to acknowledge that she took her feelings of inadequacy and insecurity and made me feel them, so to speak. So it's not an obvious process, but now it is to me. Now that I look at it, you know, as a therapist with somebody with a degree who's done a lot of my own work, it's as easy to see as anything that I was made to feel what she couldn't feel.
Mm. Yeah, that would make sense. But that comes with a lot of awareness from a parent's point of view.
Yeah.
Especially if you have, like in her case, she has 3 kids and one of them's out of line. So, and you're kind of wondering, like, what's wrong with this one? Why is the other 2 not?
Yeah, the other 2.
Why is this one being difficult?
They learned, in a way, they took it on too, but the way that they took it on is they became good. Yes. My older brother did all the right things and followed all the rules. And my younger brother, who's my very closest friend now, he became very shy and introverted and anxious. And so he got small. My older brother got small. And I'm not going to use curse words on here because I don't know your audience well enough, but I wasn't going to have it. Like, my thing was, I would rather burn this house down than have to suffer quieting myself. And so I made all kinds of noise and got in all kinds of trouble because I was trying to express that there were things inside of me that I felt that I needed that weren't being met, and the world was going to hear about me from one way or the other. They were either going to hear about me from making a mess and getting arrested like I did do, or later on in life, the way that they're hearing from me now, which is with some healing to share with people. I know what it's like to be that little angry kid getting in trouble, using drugs, getting arrested. And I have a sense of what he's asking for. And if we slow down enough to pay attention, maybe we can start as a village to give him what he needs.
Yeah. Thank you. The next point I highlighted here, it's slightly similar, but I say it. So this is page 38. So most people are not able to see others, but rather they impose themselves on you.
Right.
They do it out of anxious need, but the insidious aspect of this is they call it loving or caring.
Right. You know, I'm really thinking a lot these days about the psychological term intrusion, which is to overstep, to kind of impose yourself onto people. And I just had I'm in therapy. I've been in therapy with my therapist for 22 years, and I had my session right before you and I started talking, and we were discussing that again today about how common it is for people to impose on me their belief system, to impose on me their ideas. In fact, they often look at me like we believe the same thing, instead of asking me what I think, asking me what I feel. And it's so easy for a parent to do that to a child. A few years ago, maybe this is the best way to explain it. A few years ago, in working with a father in therapy, it came to me that sometimes the gifts that we give to our children are the gifts that we want. Right? We give them things that we want, and we call that loving. And so I took some time to think, what do my 4 children, what's a part of them that I can value that is very different than me? And so I came up with a gift for each one of them that was not my thing. It wasn't my style. It wasn't my thing. And it was a gesture. On the morning I gave to it, on Christmas morning, when I gave it to them, they love it because I cry all the time. I started crying, and I said, I want each of these gifts to represent that I see a part of you that's different from me. And that took effort and focus on my part, and I try to practice it. But I don't think most people know themselves even well enough to know that the person sitting next to them is different, because they just assume, because they're so unconscious, that everybody thinks and feels the same way. And of course, we all know that that's not true. So it's about knowing yourself well enough to be able to see somebody as other, somebody different, to be able to see and respond to them and their needs, instead of projecting onto them yourself and not really connecting to them.
Yeah. And do you think some of that is to do with, because we often see where, say, father and a son, you kind of see the son as the little you, right?
Yeah.
So you kind of want them to be pretty much the same as you,
right?
So you miss that.
Right.
You don't give them opportunity to be themselves. You just see them as like, this is the little version of you. So
yeah,
you're gonna model them to be like you.
I saw this. I was working with this father and son, and this father said to his son in a session, he said, when you were young, I wanted to play catch with you. I wanted to play what you call football, what we call soccer. I was always encouraging you to do those things. And the boy said very calmly, he said, Dad, that was your childhood. You were the athlete, and you wanted your father to play with you. I was an artist, and I wanted you to take an interest in my drawing and in my art, but you kept on trying to live your childhood through me. He said it with kindness, by the way. It was amazing, this 17-year-old boy. He said it with kindness and love and acceptance, and the father heard it. And it was this profound moment early in my career where I was like, if we don't heal ourselves, if we don't explore our own wounds, we will try to give our children something we didn't get. And in that, we will miss them, because we're not responding to their needs, but we're responding actually to our unmet needs that happened a long time ago. And so that little story of that boy kind of illustrates this point that you're asking about, which is you have to know yourself. You have to work on yourself. You have to listen and pay attention at levels that most people don't, to be able to see the other person and respond to their needs, instead of just imagining them to be an extension of you, a little mini you, so to speak.
Yeah. That definitely happened. Thank you. I'm just going to go on to chapter 5, which is about marriage, divorce, and psychosis.
Right.
So the start of it, you have the part where you talk about modeling love, words that we often use. You complete me. He is my everything. She is my world. It is quite a lot. She is my better half. He's my best friend, my lover, my biggest supporter.
Right.
And let me just go to my next. And then you have a couple of pages down. The dance of feeling each other's emptiness is exhilarating in its infancy and can be exhausting as it matures.
Right.
Is that where at the start you're using those words, and years down the line you're no longer using those words?
Again, I kind of discovered this in my own marriage first, and then have then seen it in so many other people's marriages, that so often It actually, I think it helps to refer to something that the actor Will Smith said. In fact, he was interviewed this week and repeated it again this week. And I had written this book long before he said it this week. Right. The idea is in marriage that I don't think that we're clear about, that Will Smith articulates, is that it's not your job to make your spouse happy. That's their job. And it's not their job to make you happy. That's your job. And the goal in a marriage is to come to the marriage happy, not begging the other person to fill your cup to make you happy, to fill the empty spots. And so in the very beginning with my wife, for example, I was a good listener. I made her feel safe. I was capable of soothing her anxiety. My wife suffers from some significant anxiety. And when I did those things to her, when I made her feel safe and good, she looked at me with these big, beautiful brown eyes, telling me that I was wonderful. And that was healing my wound as a child, that I needed to know that I was wonderful, because I didn't know that as a child. I thought I was just the opposite. So in the beginning phases, my ability to make her feel safe made her feel the most incredible love that she could feel. And that love that she felt made me feel healed, because my mother could never see me. And so in the beginning, it was exhilarating. We didn't eat. We didn't sleep. We would talk on the phone for 8 hours.
Yeah.
And after a while, you kind of get tired of doing the other person's work. After a while, I got tired of being the one who had to be the safe one. And sometimes I wanted to be the anxious or the angry one. But that didn't fit our pattern. And she also didn't want to always admire me. That gets old, admiring your spouse and looking up to them. And she wanted to be able to tell me when she was angry and hurt and frustrated with me. And so in the beginning, it was exhilarating and intoxicating, and it was madly in love. But eventually, you need to become a whole person, and that's your individual job. And so for us, that looked like a separation in 2009 and 10, where we had to spend some time on our own, doing our own work, so that when we got back together in 2011, I come now to the marriage with a sense that I'm okay. And now I can be there for her and support her, but I don't feel the emptiness, and vice versa. She comes to me knowing that it's her job to make herself feel safe. She has to do that with her therapist. I can help sometimes with her good friends, but to fill each other's emptiness, it's what most people get married for, and kind of they match up in that way, but eventually the same things that cause them to feel in love end up being the things that anger them about each other, because it does get exhausting to feel responsible for the other person's well-being and happiness. And nobody can sustain that. It doesn't allow you, again, to be yourself in the relationship. And you have to have two selves in a relationship for it to be a loving and lasting marriage. You can't have two part selves. You can't have two fractions, two slices of a self. You have to have what looks like more and more as you go along, two whole people present.
Yeah, so yes, that makes sense. There was so I have my tablet here with different questions I saw from your webinar. Sorry. Where am I? So one of the things you said, I think I saw this from your webinar, was we should give up the idea of being good in a relationship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Most of the arguments we're having are about whether or not I'm good or bad. And so you're not arguing about the stuff. You're arguing about, we just want to be lovable. We want to be worthy of love. And like I said earlier, the way that we learned in our childhood, the way to earn love was to be a good person, a pretty person, a smart person, an accomplished person. And so, so many times because I haven't healed myself, because I haven't done the work, or my wife or any partner, I'm asking for you to tell me that I'm good. But you see, that gets in the way of you being mad at me. If I need you to think that I'm good, then there's no space for you to be mad at me or hurt or frustrated. Yeah. So it gets in the way of intimacy, actually, the idea of being good. I have to abandon, Rumi said, there's a beautiful poem, and in it, Rumi, the great poet, says, there's a field out beyond right doing and wrongdoing, and I will meet you there. And it's a poetic way of saying there's a place where when we destroy the shoulds and the shouldn'ts and the have-tos and the musts and the good and bad, we just get to be who we are. And that's where the deepest connections are made. But in this world where there's so much emphasis on getting it right and being good, we end up so far away from each other. And that happens even in the most intimate of relationships like marriage. And most fights I hear that couples are having about each one of them trying to maintain and grab onto and hold on to this idea that they're good, when there's another way, there's a higher level, a more conscious level of dealing with our wounds and our healing than that.
Yeah. And do you think what can happen is, like, husband or wife, they might try to change the other person instead of working on themselves?
Yeah, it's a lot easier to change your spouse than it is to change yourself. It's a lot more pleasant to think that the problem is out there, not in here, right? That the spouse is the one that needs. I fantasize all the time, James, that my wife is less mature and less evolved than I am. I love thinking that she's the student and I'm the teacher. That makes me feel wonderful about myself.
Yeah, I'm so great.
Right. But the fact of the matter is we get who we get for a reason. We get who we get because there's something there to teach us. And for both me and my wife, we've learned that I'm the problem in my life. The way that I'm living my life is the reason for my unhappiness. And I would love to blame her or even blame my children. I'd love to blame my children when they struggle, that if they could just not struggle and be happy and not get into trouble, that I would be happy. But in all of that, I'm not really doing the thing that's going to make the difference, which is, the heroic journey in the first book, The Journey of the Heroic Parent that I wrote. The heroic journey is the journey inward. Ram Dass said, the great guru Ram Dass said, the only thing I can do for you is work on myself, and the only thing you can do for me is work on yourself. And that is such an easy idea for almost everybody to lose.
Yeah. I think that concept alone in the modern world doesn't seem correct. As in, like, if you meet someone and you say, "Oh, I'm working on myself, and I would appreciate if you work on yourself as well," they might get very defensive.
You're probably going to get a defense if you say something like that.
Yeah. It's like, are you trying to say there's something wrong with me?
Right.
Yeah. And so I have another quote here from the book. Yeah, another one I highlighted here. When we do our work, we change the frame from turning the other into something bad to seeing the other as simply a human being. Right.
Yeah, in the marriage chapter, I talk about an incident where my wife asked if I was available to listen, really, to some feelings that she had. And it was scary. It was just a Saturday. It was nothing unique or different about any other day in a lot of ways. And I remember she actually said to me, "It's okay if you can't. It's okay if you're spent, you're exhausted emotionally," because I just finished working. And I remember thinking, this is scary, but I'm going to tell her the truth, which I'm not very good at. I usually try to lie and make her happy and try to be there for her when I can't. And so I said to her, I'm kind of spent. I would love to have the rest of the day off from that kind of emotional heavy lifting. And if you're still upset tomorrow, then we can talk tomorrow. And she said, it was a gift. She said, "I get it. I'll talk to my best friend." She has a good friend that she talks to. And I understand. And I was so relieved, because it wasn't that I was a bad husband, which is what I believed somebody who couldn't be there for their wife is, but rather a human husband. I had reached the limit of my capacity for that day, for that hour, and I owned it and I expressed it. That was my challenge, to tell the truth. But what she did was equally as beautiful, which is she held the space for me, and then she found a way to take care of herself. She wasn't abandoned. She wasn't left by herself. She just went to somebody that could be there for her that day. And that's why I love it, that when our work shifts, we get to a point where if you and I are friends and you can't show up for me because you're working, you got stress, maybe you're struggling with depression, instead of making you a bad friend, I just turn you into a human friend who can't do it, just can't do it that day. And I think that that's for me, a very powerful shift in thinking, is thinking of each other as humans instead of good or bad, good or bad friends, good or bad husbands, good or bad wives or children.
Yeah, because that's one of the things you often hear in a troubled relationship. And what people outside will say, are they a good husband or are they a good wife?
Right.
Is that solely judging them on... You're obviously still judging their behavior, like you're not really judging the person themselves.
Right. Yeah. Once we become informed about the effect of trauma in our life, we realize that bad is the substitute for somebody who's really wounded and really not doing well. And good is somebody that may be healed or just may be capable of putting up what other people want to see, what other people want to hear. And so the words good and bad start to lose their value and lose their meaning. The more work we get into, we start to have this is the irony. We start to have a much more capable, loving, generous, authentic perspective on each other. That's the irony, is when you kill good and bad, you're capable to show up with more love. When good or bad are in play, then it's about failure. It's about being worthy of things. And that kind of consciousness, it's just too hard to live in all the time. We all know what it's like, because we all know what it's like to feel that shame when we come up short, and how we don't feel worthy of love, and we just want to hide and disappear because we believe that we're unacceptable.
There was another question I had here. What do we struggle with telling the truth in a marriage?
Well, I think there are two primary jobs in a relationship, an intimate relationship. One is to tell the truth about what you think and feel and who you are. And the other job is to be a safe person to tell the truth to. And usually I find that one person is better at one than the other, and the other person is better at the one. In our marriage, which is very common, I am good at being there for my wife. I can listen. I can soothe. I'm great at that. I'm not a great truth teller, James. My wiring in my brain tells me that I have to tell her what she wants to hear. So my focus is I have to become a better truth teller. Now, on my wife's side of the equation, she's a great truth teller. She'll tell me any thought that she has about me, about my family, about anybody, anytime.
That's great, isn't it?
She's good at that. What she's not as good at is being a safe person for me to talk to. So if she were here today talking to you, she would say her focus is on being a better listener. And by better listener, I don't mean just hearing the words. I mean being a safe person, not having a reaction or a trigger that's going to shut me down. And so it's not always true. And of course, marriage is more complex than this, but I like to talk about it as the talker tends to be the taker.
Yes.
And the listener tends to be the giver. And so if I'm talking at you about my life, I'm asking you to listen to me with love and patience. And if you're listening to me, you are giving the gift of holding. And I don't think we see the taking in the talking and the giving in the listening as much as we could. Because to listen, in my mind, there's really no greater gift in the world than to be able to be a safe person for somebody to tell you the craziest, the most irrational, the most upsetting thoughts, and to be a safe person is one of the greatest gifts. And I'm also learning from myself that my courage in telling the truth about what I feel and think, I'm not talking about the big things. I'm just talking about where I want to eat, whether I have enough energy to listen. That's the part that I struggle to tell the truth in. So for me, that's my focus, because that's my weakness.
Yes. I actually had a question. One of the questions I was going to ask you about it, taking and giving. You mentioned it on, I think I wrote it on this tablet. So yeah, I think it was on chapter 4. What is giving and taking in a relationship?
I don't know if you guys over there is into Brene Brown, as people seem to be into Brene Brown over here, but she's kind of the queen of pop psychology and self-help over here.
Yes,
right?
We are as well. Yeah.
I use her as an example because her emphasis is in showing up and telling the truth, being vulnerable.
Yes.
Expressing your most authentic truth. And that is an important part of intimacy. That's half of it, an important half of it. But what I don't think gets enough press is what is required to be the listener. to be the one that says, I'm gonna put aside my triggers, set them aside temporarily, or work on myself enough that I'm not triggered, so that I can be a safe person for you to tell the truth to. That is just as important. That's 50% of the equation in intimacy, and I don't think people on earth realize how much work it takes to listen deeply. I use this example with parents. This is the simplest example. If I go to a friend, if I go to you, if you and I are friends, and I go to you to tell you something about myself that's hard to say, and your response is to gasp like, like that, what I know immediately is you're not safe. What I know immediately is you need to be taken care of, and you can't be there for me. So I don't think people understand that and talk about that a lot. So when Brené's talking about showing up and telling the truth and being brave and being courageous and being the one in the arena, really fighting the fight, I don't think she understands and talks about how important it is to learn to be a safe person for somebody and to say, it doesn't matter if what you're telling me is true. It doesn't matter even if it frightens me a little bit. I'm going to set that over here. I'll take care of that in my therapy. I'll take care of that at my 12-step support group. And I'll do that over there so that I can be here for you right now. And that's what I mean by taking and giving. I used to think that needing my spouse was the highest form of love.
Yeah.
I thought that needing my wife was like mean that I just loved her. I was overflowing with love. But needing is different than loving, because loving is a giving thing and needing is a taking thing. Neither one of them are bad or good. They just are what they are. But I think that we confuse needing and taking with loving, and they're really the opposite. Love means I have enough, and I have enough to spare to give you. And it's not a common idea in our culture. It's not a common idea to recognize that love is about abundance. Love is about having enough. Love is about, I always tell parents, go do your work. Go do your work. Take care of your fear, your real, honest, earned fear for your child's well-being. Take care of it over there so that when you come to the child, your interaction won't be to serve the ego that you're good. You won't be asking for something from them. You'll be able to give to them, which is really the job of a parent, is to hold the child, not vice versa. So it's complicated, but it's also pretty simple when we understand that we have to learn to take, but we also have to learn to give, and we have to know what that looks like. And it looks like doing your own work so that you can be there for the other person and not always have them be there for you.
Yeah. So when you talk about the next part's about parenting, but I just want to go back on this. When you talk about needing someone in a relationship, is you think needing someone's good, but in theory, needing them is taken from them.
Right. I was doing a couples intensive, and the wife said to me, she paused. They were doing a role play, talking to each other. And she paused and she turned to me. She said, "Is it okay to need my husband?" She asked me. I said, "Of course. We all need people. But don't confuse that with love. If you do, it'll be confusing to both of you. And so, yes, you could ask him for things, and that's fine. Spouses, we give things to each other. We give things to our friends, right? Everybody's giving. But it's when we think, when I have somebody come to me, for example, I do parent seminars and lectures all the time, and I have people come up to me on the break. If it's a long day workshop, there'll be a 10-minute break here, a 15-minute break here to get some water, to stretch, to go to the restroom if you need to. People come up to me in between to talk to me, and they don't realize I've been giving, and I need this break. I need this break for me because I can't give for 8 hours straight. I need my 10-minute breaks, my 15-minute breaks, my lunch break, because I need to just relax and reset my nervous system. And so I don't think people realize how much they're pulling out of another person. And I think becoming more and more aware of giving and receiving, of giving and taking, can kind of help relationships get more clear about what's happening in a given moment, or in a moment of conflict or stress or sadness.
And we're just going to talk, my next part was to talk about parenting. Sorry, just on that one. Yeah, sorry, this question should be good. So I think you mentioned somewhere that we should be friends with our child. Did I say that?
Yeah. Yeah, I wrote an article about that a few years ago.
Yeah.
And then I included in the book. There's an idea in popular culture that says you shouldn't be your child's friend.
Mm.
And I thought, I think I know what people are saying. I think they're saying you have to set tough boundaries and make tough decisions, and you have to be willing to let your child be angry at you. I think that's what they're saying, and I understand that's the point. But what I also think is, I don't think people understand that that's true in all relationships. If you and I are friends, you're not my child, but if you and I are friends, I still have a responsibility to set boundaries, to say no, and to let you be angry about it, right? It's the exact same task. And so when you fool yourself into thinking that the parent-child relationship is so different than everything else, I think you're missing the essence of every relationship. In every relationship, if you're my best friend and I allow you to use me, I allow you to violate my boundaries, I allow you to hurt me and harm me without me standing up for myself, that's not healthy either.
No.
And that's not that much different than being a father and a mother. So I get what people mean when they have that expression about don't be your child's friend. And I also think that it reveals sometimes an aspect where people don't understand that they have the same jobs and duties in virtually most of the same job and duties in virtually all of their relationships. The only thing that's different in the parent-child relationship between all the other ones is my job as a parent is primarily to take care of the child. The child ought not to be and is not equipped to take care of me. Whereas in a friendship, it's a back and forth. In a marriage, it's a back and forth. In a my colleague and I can have a back and forth relationship. But in the parent-child relationship, the child can't take care of the parent. It's too threatening. It's too toxic. They're too tempted to give up themselves to create a safe home for themselves, that it's too hard for a child to take care of a parent. That's the main difference.
Mm-hmm. Mm. I think this was on the. So my next question was, I think you mentioned it from Alice Miller's book, which is the child must adapt to ensure the illusion of love, care, and kindness, but the adult does not need to do the same.
Yeah. First of all, I'll tell you, Alice Miller, I think, wrote the most important book on child development in the history of books that we have today. I think The Drama of the Gifted Child, the book she wrote in 1979, is the most important book about child development that we have. And I'm not alone in thinking that. Lots of people think that, and millions of copies have been sold. Having said that, go ahead.
Yeah, it's a small book as well.
It's not very long.
No. I think if you're reading it, you either question yourself or you won't believe what you're saying.
That's right. The most common response I have is from mothers who feel guilty because they forget to put themselves in the story as the child. And so they get flooded with guilt when they read it because it's about how parents wound children. So when I encourage, especially mothers and some fathers, to read it, I say, remember, in this book, you're the child, not the parent. I know it will be tempting to put yourself in that role because it's so much your identity, but for just this book, suspend the mother role for just a minute. You can go back to it and then insert yourself as the child. You know, Alice Miller said, the quote that you were referring to, she talks about how children are conditioned to love and take care of the parents. But the cost of that means that they have to love the parent and think the parent is a good parent and tell the parent that they're a good parent. That a child's anger or hurt or resentment is a threat to the ego of the parent. But that's the parent's work. Yeah. But since most parents don't do their work, the child takes that on. So they have to present this idea, this loving idea to the parent that the parent is good to heal the parent wound, which is backwards. But I also have parents say that my child abandoned me, and I make the point, I say, technically speaking, children can't abandon parents. Abandonment is something that an adult can do to a child, but a child can't do to a parent. What that tells me is that you have some work to do to heal the wounds of your own abandonment in your own childhood, and to develop a stronger sense of self. So you're not asking this young child, this impressionable young child, to give you the love that you didn't get. Alice Miller says parents are often trying to prevent something that already happened. And I think that's a really profound idea. They're trying to correct something in the child that happened in their past. And I don't think that's common sense thinking. That's why her book is so wonderful.
Yes, it is. Yeah. Oh. Thank you. I just have another point here. Sorry, let me just go back. Yeah, sorry, one of the things I saw you talk about was how does parents gaslight their children?
I wrote something a couple of years ago on my social media post that said almost all parents gaslight their children.
I doubt there's good feedback, was it?
Oh, it did. It was half and half. Half of the people are like, thank you for telling me. And there were a lot of them saying, boy, you have some things you need to work on because that's just not true.
You've crossed the line now.
I did cross the line. I crossed a few people's lines. But it's more simple and subtle. It's simple. Like a child comes to a parent. I hear it every day. Every day. I hear a parent, either in the story that they're telling me or if I'm observing it, a child comes up and says, Mom or Dad, I'm sad or I'm hurt or I'm angry. And the parent tries to talk them out of it. Well, your friends didn't mean that, or they're probably just jealous, but they probably didn't intend to hurt you, or I think maybe you're taking it the wrong way, or maybe you're being too sensitive, or you're taking it personal. All of these examples that everybody says all the time are gaslighting. It might not be as extreme as what people think about when they think about gaslighting, but James, it is so rare. It is so rare for one human being to come to another human being and to tell them about their distress and their upset feelings and have the other person say, I'm so glad you're telling me and talking to me about it. I'm so sorry. I want to be there for you and understand what you're going through, and I appreciate you trusting me. That is so rare, especially if those feelings are directed at me, right? If I'm the subject of the hurt and the anger and the other person, because I'm trying to be good, I have no tolerance for those feelings because they threaten me. So I can't overstate enough how common gaslighting is and how often we parents do it to our children. I would like to tell you I haven't done it or that I rarely do it. And the fact of the matter is that I've dented my children in many ways, and this is one of the ways that I've dented all of them. And it's something that they're going to have to heal from. And if I'm willing to look at it, I can be a part of that healing, but we dent our children and we dent each other in this way all the time. I'm 53 years old, and when I tell people I don't like mushrooms, literally, nobody says, oh, okay. They say, well, you can't taste them, or try them because these have garlic on them or butter on them or whatever. And I'm like, if I can't not like mushrooms at 53 years old, I'm pretty sure it's happening with all things all the time around more subtle and nuanced feelings.
Yeah. Definitely, yeah. So just a couple of more points here. This one, you talked about the difference between control and influencing the children. When you talk about control, are you talking about in a sense of controlling what a child's doing, directing their behavior?
Sort of. It's more, when I talk about control versus influence, see, the best way to try to influence a child is to not try to control them. If I tried to get you to believe that my football team was the best football team, versus just telling you I'm an Arsenal fan. That's my team. So that's the way I feel about it. And
so is me. I'm an Arsenal fan as well.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go. So
what do you know?
I think the control is when we use blaming, guilting, shaming, intimidation, when we try to emotionally coerce the other person into the behavior. A simple example. My daughter's playing with her food at dinner, not eating her vegetables, okay? This is a story that plays out 100 times in our lives, right? And instead of saying to her, Olivia, if you finish your vegetables, you can have dessert, which is a healthy boundary, If you finish everything, you can have your dessert. I've chosen a vegetable that I know she likes, so I'm not forcing her to eat something she doesn't like, so she's just not in the mood for eating something healthy. That's an okay boundary. But what do we do? What it looks like is we say, okay, Olivia, if you don't eat your vegetables, you can't have dessert. And then I say, it's chocolate chip ice cream. It's your favorite. Do you want to be big and strong like your brother Jake? Olivia, Olivia now, right now. Do it. So you see, I'm using all kinds of things to try to control the outcome, the behavior, instead of setting a boundary and me and her living with it. And that's what I mean by control versus influence. It's trying to manipulate somebody into thinking, feeling, and doing something versus having a clear boundary with consequences and detaching yourself from the outcome. It would be okay if she doesn't eat the vegetables because she can't have dessert and she's going to be hungry again eventually. And the next meal is going to be something healthy, right? I'm going to give her something healthy. So there's no loss in it, but because of my controlling nature, I want the outcome that I want. And here's what's even worse. Not only do we try to control the outcome, which was part of your question, but we also try to get them to want it and like it and believe in it. That's the insanity of it. It's not just that I'm happy that you're eating your vegetables. I want you to know that I'm a good dad who cares for you. Back to me being good again. And I want you to buy into it so I don't have to fight with boundaries. I don't have to set boundaries. If I can convince you to believe what I believe, I don't have to have a boundary with you in our relationship. And that's where the controlling comes into, is coercing somebody to think, believe, and behave the way that we want them to.
Brilliant. Just two more questions on parenting, which is the obvious one. I don't know if this is the obvious one, but what are some mistakes parents make?
I think the most common mistake that parents make on planet Earth is that they tell their children how they feel so that the child thinks of that as their responsibility.
Is that telling the child how the child feels?
No, it's the parent telling the child how the parent feels.
Okay.
So if you're my son and I tell you that I'm happy, I want you to know you're doing good. And if I'm sad or scared or frustrated or angry, you're doing bad. And so most parents think if I tell my children how I feel, then they will then change their behavior. They'll know that when I'm happy, they're doing well, and when I'm angry, they're doing poorly. And that will become their moral North Star. That'll become their compass for doing right and wrong. Here's the problem with that. Then the child grows up not knowing who they are and believing that when a friend or a peer or a girlfriend or a boyfriend are mad at them, it's about them and it's their fault. You know, parents will say to me all the time, my child is really susceptible to peer pressure. They really care about what other people think about them, and I don't know where this came from. And what I always say is, it came from you.
Okay.
You told them how you felt, and that in essence, that they were responsible for that feeling. And to get you to stop feeling sad, they had to behave a certain way, or to stop feeling angry, they had to behave a certain way. And it was their job to make you proud. And that was never the truth. That is not the cure to the problem. That is the problem. So the most common parenting technique that I see, which is parents telling the children how they themselves feel so the child knows whether they're doing right or wrong, actually wounds the child and pressures the child into taking care of other people and not knowing who they are.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to ask you about your Evoke therapy.
Right.
Is that, you do that online as well?
We do it. We have an online offering, an intensive offering. We look at family of origin. We use role play and psychodrama. Really powerful, really emotional. We also have in-person intensives that we're running all the time. There's two going on right now. And then we have our wilderness program. So this is where young people and their families go out into the wilderness, and they live out there for 10 weeks. The children do. The parents come and visit. They live out there for 10 weeks in small groups. And in that context, in that milieu, in that setting, they kind of learn what it means to be a team member, to communicate, to have empathy, to assert themselves. They learn all the things about life that they would be learning in talk therapy, but they're learning in an experiential setting. In America, I learned this a few years ago. NASA, our space program, they use wilderness therapy for their astronauts if they haven't worked together before, because in that wilderness setting, you learn to trust, you learn vulnerability, you learn to rely on each other, you learn to build healthy relationships, whereas exercises or activities or workbooks don't quite teach it with the same level of impact. And so we do it for the children, but then we also have these psychodrama intensives where you go back and talk to your younger self. You talk to your mother and your father and your brother and your sister growing up, and you have a visceral experience that really reminds you of kind of what you're made of and why are you struggling in your marriage today? Well, so much of that is found in our histories by exploring our histories. That's what Alice Miller said on the first page of that book that I mentioned earlier, The Drama of the Gifted Child. She said, we have learned by our experience that there's only one enduring weapon in our fight against mental illness, and that is the discovery of the unique emotional experience of our childhood. In my work, you have to go back. In attachment work, attachment-based therapy, you have to go back and look at your childhood critically to understand what's going on for you today. It's not a search for blame, but it's a search for understanding about who you are and what you're made of.
Yes. Fantastic. Had one more question, if you don't mind.
I don't mind.
Last question. And what's your job in a marriage?
What my job in a marriage is to enjoy my wife. And that's her job, is to enjoy me. And I ask couples all the time, how are you doing with that job? If you shift the perspective about, it's basically the same. It's another way of talking about the thing that I was talking about earlier. Will Smith said about he and his wife Jada's marriage. He said, we decided that at a certain point that we were going to go get happy and then come to the marriage happy. And we were going to walk our separate individual journeys together, supporting each other. But if you come empty, if you come begging, if you come relying on the other person, then you end up blaming them for your unhappiness, right? Because that's the same thing. If it's their job to make you happy, if you're not happy, it's their fault. Same with parents and children. Parents tell me all the time how unhappy they are with their child's legitimate problems, drug use, suicidality, depression, anxiety. And I say, I understand you love your child. I understand your child's suffering causes you pain. I get that. But it's your job to sleep at night. It's your job to find your serenity and your peace and your happiness. Go do your work somewhere else so that when you come back to the child, or in a marriage, when you come to your partner, you're able to enjoy them. You're able to fall in love with their unique dilemmas. My wife has to make room for my dilemmas, and I have to make room for her dilemmas. And that means that I have to take care of myself, not just in the marriage, but I have to take care of myself in other places too. That's my responsibility. That's my job.
Thank you very much. Jesus Christ, can talk to you all day.
Thank you, James. It was an honor to be here.
Thank you. I really appreciate your time. And it's only lunchtime for you anyway, so which is good.
I'm heading out to lunch. You bet.
Yeah.
And you have a good weekend. You're already done with the day, so enjoy yourself in your evening and have a great weekend.
Yes. Evening time for me. Great book. Thank you very much. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
All right, James. Take care.
Thank you. Have a good weekend, you too.
You too.
Thank you.
Do I hang up now or do I wait?
I'm just going to hang up just a second. Sorry. I'm not sure what
if you enjoyed today's
for.
episode, I would really appreciate it.
I just figured I may as well look professional.
It looked really professional.
Yeah.
Or DM me on Instagram. The show notes will include all of the relevant links from today's episode. If you haven't already, please download, leave a rating, and share with your friends.
Sorry.
You might just reach that person who needs to hear this
happens all the
message.
time.
Please be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. I am James Lumumba, signing off with gratitude.